A single dad working nights as a janitor never expected to be the one who saved an entire corporation. But when crisis struck, he stepped forward with the knowledge no one else had. What followed wasn't just about saving a machine, it was about rebuilding a life. Let me know what touched you most in the comments and hit subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Light rain slid down the glass walls of the SkyTech Tower in Seattle, a soft gray curtain over the city. But inside the top floors of Helios Systems, no one noticed the weather. On the 40th floor, the air was heavy with tension, every second ticking louder than the last. Screens glowed across the conference room, each filled with red error codes that refused to disappear. At the center of it all was the company's pride and future. The $100 million AI server system that had just gone dark. This was not just another machine. It was the crown jewel, the breakthrough Helios had promised to unveil to government officials in a matter of hours. The deal tied to that demonstration would secure contracts for the next decade, billions in revenue, and perhaps the very survival of the company in a world where competitors circled like sharks. But now, with each failed reboot and each frustrated shave from her engineers, that future was slipping away. Olivia Grant stood at the head of the table, her sharp eyes scanning the team she had handpicked from the best universities and research labs in the country. She had built Helios from a scrappy startup into a name that carried weight in every boardroom, and she had done it with a reputation for brilliance and unshakable focus. Some called her cold, but Olivia wore the label like armor. In truth, she believed focus was the only way to survive in an industry that devoured weakness. Yet even she felt the edges of panic pressing in. Now 3 hours, that was all they had. Government contractors were already en route, expecting to see a flawless demonstration. Instead, the server refused to respond. Reboots had failed. Diagnostics showed contradictions that no one could explain. Emergency protocols had been exhausted. The brightest minds in the room, men and women with doctorates and decades of experience, had hit a wall. Olivia gripped the back of her chair, her knuckles pale, listening as arguments broke out across the table. "It has to be the cooling loop," one insisted. "We've checked that 3 times," another shot back. The clash of voices only made the room feel smaller, tighter, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Every passing minute was money burning, credibility dissolving, and years of work unraveling. For Olivia, the stakes were personal. This was her company, her vision, and her responsibility. Failure was not an option she could accept. Yet, as she stared at the flickering error codes, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Helplessness, the kind that gnawed at the edges of control, threatening to undo everything she had built. Outside, the rain continued to fall, indifferent to the storm gathering inside. On the surface, it was just another gray morning in Seattle. But on the 40th floor of SkyTech Tower, Helios Systems was fighting for its life, and Olivia Grant knew she was staring at the greatest crisis of her career. While the brightest minds battled failure on the 40th floor, far below in the quiet corridors of SkyTech Tower, another figure moved unnoticed. Daniel Ross pushed his cart slowly, the soft squeak of the wheels echoing against marble floors polished to a shine. To most, he was just the night janitor, a man in a plain uniform, mop in hand, eyes lowered, there to clean up after others had gone home. At 36, he blended into the background of Helios Systems, invisible in a place obsessed with brilliance. But Daniel was anything but ordinary. There was a time not so long ago when his name was whispered with respect in aerospace circles. He had been one of Lockwell Aerospace's brightest engineers, a man responsible for designing navigation systems where a single miscalculation could mean the difference between life and death. He had patents under his name, breakthroughs in cooling systems that carried fighter jets safely through hostile skies. Colleagues once looked to him for answers, and he delivered with steady hands and a mind that thrived under pressure. That life, though, had ended abruptly 5 years earlier. His wife Claire had been diagnosed with an aggressive cancer. Daniel fought alongside her, balancing treatments, sleepless nights, and the needs of their little boy Ethan, who was only 3 at the time. For 18 months they battled together, clinging to hope as though it might turn the tide. But the disease was relentless. When Claire passed, Daniel faced a choice more daunting than any engineering problem he had ever solved. He could return to the high-pressure world of aerospace, bury himself in work, and put Ethan in full-time care. Or he could walk away from the career he loved, take whatever job allowed him to be present, and raise his son himself. For Daniel, the answer was clear. Titles and accolades could wait. Ethan could not. So he traded conference rooms for custodial closets, trading equations for emptying trash bins. At night, he scrubbed office floors under fluorescent lights. By day, he walked Ethan to school, packed lunches, and sat in the front row at every small performance or science fair. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't what anyone expected from a man once at the top of his field. But it was the work Daniel valued most, the work of being a father. He never told his coworkers about his past. When people asked, he simply said he liked the hours. He didn't want pity. He didn't want awkward questions about why he had stepped away. To them, he was just Daniel, the quiet janitor who showed up on time, did his job without complaint, and disappeared before dawn. That was enough, and yet, as the rain tapped against the windows and chaos brewed high above, Daniel's story was about to collide with Olivia Grant's in a way neither of them could have predicted. For now, he continued down the hallway, mop in hand, unaware that destiny was already turning its wheels. The man the world had forgotten was about to be remembered, not for the titles he once carried, but for the courage he still held. There was a time when Daniel Ross's world looked very different. In those years before cancer, before loss, before the quiet routine of a janitor's cart, he lived in a universe of blueprints and flight simulations at Lockwell Aerospace. Daniel was the engineer everyone turned to when the stakes were impossibly high. He specialized in navigation systems for fighter jets, machines that demanded absolute precision. In that line of work, a single miscalculation could cost not just money, but lives. And Daniel thrived there. He could take a tangled web of equations, sensors, and thermodynamics, and find the thread that made everything hold together. His colleagues often joked that he didn't just design systems. He made chaos behave. He remembered the pride of watching his designs take flight for the first time. Sleek jets cutting across the horizon, guided by systems he had built from long nights and relentless attention to detail. There were patents with his name etched in black and white, accolades from peers, the kind of career that promised not just security, but legacy. Daniel loved that work. It demanded everything from him, but it gave him purpose. He was building machines that protected lives, defending skies his own family lived under. And then came Claire's diagnosis, a word so small but devastating enough to bring an entire life to its knees. Cancer. Aggressive. Suddenly the equations on his desk blurred into meaninglessness. Meetings that once consumed him were replaced with hospital rooms, infusion chairs, and the endless rhythm of doctor's appointments. Overnight, the man designing systems for aircraft was learning new systems of medicine, weighing statistics that never seemed to fall in their favor. For 18 months, Daniel became a caretaker, a nurse, and a father trying to shield his son from fear that no child should carry. Ethan was only 3, too young to understand why his mother's hair was falling out, why she grew weaker each day, yet old enough to feel the weight in the air, to notice the tears his father thought he had hidden. Through it all, Daniel made a vow. He would not let his son walk through those shadows alone. When Claire passed, the silence in their home was unbearable. The world urged him to return to work, to reclaim his place in the field where he had once been unstoppable. But the thought of leaving Ethan in full-time daycare, of missing the fragile years when a boy most needs his father, was unthinkable. Daniel faced a choice no engineer could design his way out of: career or fatherhood, prestige or presence. And he chose Ethan. He turned away from the conference tables, from the prestige of aerospace labs, and stepped into a life most would never imagine for him. Custodial work was steady. It paid enough to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. More importantly, it gave him mornings to walk Ethan to school, afternoons to hear about spelling tests and science projects, evenings to sit at the table and make sure his son never doubted that he was loved. It was not the life Daniel once envisioned, but it was the life he chose with open eyes. To the outside world, he had given up everything. But in the quiet moments, tucking Ethan into bed, listening to his steady breathing, Daniel knew the truth. He had traded one kind of legacy for another. And though his past was filled with patents and fighter jets, His future was now anchored in something far greater, the chance to raise his son with all the love and presence a father could give. Life had become a rhythm for Daniel, nights spent in the quiet halls of Skytech Tower, pushing his cart past endless glass walls, empty offices glowing faintly from screens left on by tired employees. He found comfort in the silence. It gave him time to think, to remember, and sometimes to forget. Most nights were uneventful, but this night would change everything. As he rolled his cart past the 40th floor conference room, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. The voices inside were sharp, hurried, rising with the desperation of people running out of time. Daniel slowed without meaning to, the sound drawing him in. He didn't intend to eavesdrop, but engineers under pressure often forgot the volume of their own voices, and what he heard stopped him cold. Thermal sensors are giving inconsistent readings, one man said, his tone edged with frustration. We've checked the cooling loop 3 times, another snapped back. Thermal sensors, cooling loops, pressure differentials, words that might have been gibberish to anyone else in the hallway. But for Daniel, they lit up memories like sparks to dry kindling. He had seen this pattern before. He had wrestled with these same failures when designing fighter jet navigation systems. Electronics pushed to their limits, overheating in ways that didn't always come from the obvious places. He remembered late nights hunched over circuit boards, tracing anomalies no one else could find, learning that sometimes the problem wasn't the primary system at all, but the backup meant to protect it. Daniel froze beside his cart, mop still in hand, his mind racing faster than his body. Could it be the same here? Could this be the very flaw he had solved years ago, dressed now in the disguise of a different machine? His heart thudded as he pieced it together. If the backup thermal sensor was misreading even a fraction of pressure, just 75 psi, it would trigger a shutdown to protect the system. And hadn't he just heard someone mention a difference of 78? The numbers fell into place so clearly, it was almost painful. He knew the answer. He could fix this. But then the hesitation came. Who was he to walk into that room? Inside were some of the brightest engineers in the world, people with advanced degrees and powerful titles. He was just the janitor, a man in uniform with a mop bucket, invisible until something needed cleaning. The weight of that truth pressed hard, and yet, standing in that hallway, he also felt the pull of something stronger. He thought of Ethan. What kind of example would he set if he stayed silent while knowing he could help? He had always told his son that courage meant doing the right thing, even when no one believed you belonged. Wasn't this one of those moments? Daniel's fingers tightened on the handle of the cart. He could feel the thrum of destiny in the pit of his stomach, the sense that one choice right now might change everything. He looked at the glowing light spilling from the conference room, listened to the voices fraying with panic, and realized he could not walk away. For the first time in years, Daniel Ross lifted his hand, took a breath, and knocked gently on the door. The knock was soft, almost hesitant, but in the charged silence of the conference room, it sounded louder than it should have. A project manager nearest to the door frowned, annoyed at the interruption. He pulled it open and found Daniel standing there, mop handle still in his hand, uniform damp from hours of work. "This is a secure meeting," the manager snapped. "You can't be here." Daniel's voice was calm, steady, carrying a quiet confidence that made Olivia Grant look up from the table. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, "but I think I know what's causing your problem." The room stilled. Engineers exchanged glances, some irritated, some amused. A janitor offering solutions to a crisis that had stumped PhDs. It felt absurd. But Olivia caught something in his tone, something sharp and precise that didn't sound like guesswork. She leaned forward. "What did you just say?" Daniel shifted slightly but didn't back down. He pointed toward the glowing diagnostic screen, still visible from the doorway. "Your backup thermal sensor," he explained. "It's sending false pressure readings. The system thinks it's overheating when it's not." In aerospace, we learned that even a difference of 75 psi between the primary and the backup can trigger a shutdown. "Right now, your system shows 78. The lead engineer scoffed. "We've run diagnostics on every sensor. That can't be it." Daniel didn't flinch. "Diagnostics will show they're functioning, but what you need to do is isolate the backup circuit, bypass it temporarily, and reset using only the primary cooling loop. Once you're stable, recalibrate the backup. If you don't, the system will keep shutting down no matter how many times you restart. For a moment, silence pressed down. No one wanted to admit desperation, but every face in the room carried the same truth. They were out of options. Olivia's gaze locked on Daniel. He didn't look like a man guessing. He looked like someone who had solved this problem before, someone who knew what was at stake when failure wasn't an option. "Do it," Olivia said firmly. The lead engineer hesitated, then bent over his terminal, fingers flying across the keys. He isolated the backup sensor, rerouted the thermal circuit, and initiated the restart sequence. The room held its collective breath. 10 seconds, 20, 30. And then, slowly, one by one, the error lights shifted from red to green. Cooling stabilized. Processors hummed back to life. The massive AI server roared with energy, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "It's working." The relief was instant, flooding the room like air after drowning. Engineers exhaled, shoulders dropping, eyes wide. Conversations broke into hurried amazement, but every gaze eventually turned back to the doorway, where Daniel still stood quietly, mop in hand, as though he hadn't just saved a $100 million system in less than 5 minutes. Olivia rose slowly from her chair and walked toward him. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of shock, curiosity, and something deeper. "Who are you?" she asked softly. Daniel gave a faint smile, almost apologetic. "Just someone who used to work on systems where small mistakes could cost lives." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Olivia realized in that moment that her company's fate had been rescued not by a degree on the wall, but by the quiet conviction of a man no one had thought to notice. When the server lights stabilized and the crisis was declared over, the engineers celebrated with relief. But Daniel had already slipped away. He gathered his cart, the mop bucket sloshing softly as he wheeled it back down the hallway, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. By the time the first congratulations filled the room, the man who had saved them was already gone. Olivia Grant stayed behind after the others dispersed, staring at the green-lit monitors that only minutes ago had been an ocean of failure. She replayed the janitor's words in her mind, the precision of his explanation, the calm way he described pressure differentials and thermal loops as though they were second nature. That wasn't guesswork. That was expertise. But how? Who exactly was Daniel Ross? The question refused to leave her. So later that afternoon, Olivia asked her assistant for his file. It was a simple request, one that carried no urgency, and yet her heart quickened as the manila folder slid across her desk. She flipped it open, expecting to see a routine employment history. Instead, what she read made her sit back in stunned silence. Daniel Ross, age 36, current position, night janitor, Helios Systems, hired 3 years ago. Prior employment, Lockwell Aerospace. Title, Lead Systems Engineer. Responsibilities, development of navigation and cooling systems for advanced fighter aircraft. 12 patents registered under his name. Led multiple teams on projects critical to national defense. And then a 3-year gap, marked only as personal circumstances. No references, no technical work since. Emergency contact, Ethan Ross, age 8, listed as son. Olivia's breath caught. This wasn't a janitor who stumbled into luck. This was a man who had once been at the pinnacle of his field. A man whose fingerprints were likely on systems worth billions of dollars, whose innovations had flown at supersonic speeds across skies most people never saw. And yet, here he was pushing a mop, invisible to everyone who passed him in the hall. The more she read, the clearer the picture became. Daniel had not lost his career to incompetence. He had walked away. She thought of the way he had left the conference room that morning, not staying to bask in praise, not even waiting for acknowledgement. He had said only that he needed to pick up his son from school. And now the truth sat before her in black and white. He had sacrificed it all for Ethan. Olivia closed the file slowly, her hand lingering on the cover. In her world, people clawed for titles, chased prestige, and measured their worth in numbers and deals. But this man had chosen something very different. He had traded boardrooms for bedtime stories, patents for packed lunches, laboratories for playgrounds. To most, it might have looked like a fall, but Olivia saw something else entirely. She saw strength. She saw love. She saw a man who had redefined success in the quietest, most powerful way. For the first time in years, Olivia Grant felt her definition of brilliance begin to shift. The janitor she had barely noticed had just saved her company. The engineer she had discovered in that file had just humbled her vision of leadership. And somewhere deep down, though she would not yet admit it, the woman behind the CEO title felt something stir, a recognition that Daniel Ross might not only change her company's future, but her own as well. The next afternoon, the sidewalks outside Lincoln Elementary buzzed with the familiar rhythm of dismissal. Parents clustered together in small groups, chatting about homework and soccer practice, while children spilled through the doors with backpacks bouncing. Among them stood Daniel Ross, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket, eyes scanning the crowd for the only face that mattered, his son's. Olivia Grant's black sedan pulled up quietly across the street. For a moment, she hesitated. It wasn't often she approached people personally. As CEO, her world was boardrooms and contracts, not schoolyards. But this wasn't business as usual. She crossed the street, heels clicking against the pavement, and stopped a few feet from Daniel. "Mr. Ross," she said, her voice softer than the one she used in meetings. Daniel turned, surprised to see her here. He straightened instinctively, caught between confusion and caution. "Miss Grant, what are you doing here?" Olivia offered a small smile, one that carried both respect and curiosity. "I came to speak with you directly about yesterday." She paused, then added, "About your future." Daniel's brow furrowed. "I told you I was just—" "You weren't just anything," she interrupted gently. "You solved a problem my best engineers couldn't touch. And after reading your file, I know exactly why." She took a breath. "I'd like to offer you a position at Helios. Senior Systems Engineer, $200,000 a year. Full benefits, and most importantly, flexible hours. Work from home when you need. Core meetings only. We'll make it work for you." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. His eyes dropped to the pavement, the weight of her words pressing heavily, the salary, the title, the chance to return to the work he once loved. It was more than he had imagined possible. But then, as always, his thoughts went to Ethan. "That's generous," he said slowly, "but my son comes first. I can't sacrifice the time I've built with him." Before Olivia could respond, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Dad!" Ethan came charging out of the school doors, backpack askew, hair tousled from a day of play. He barreled into Daniel's side with the unstoppable force of an 8-year-old. "Guess what? We learned about computer processors today. Mrs. Johnson said they get really hot and need cooling systems, just like airplanes." His words tumbled out in a rush. Then he noticed Olivia, shy now. He tucked himself behind his father's leg. Daniel ruffled his son's hair, smiling despite the tension in his chest. "That's pretty cool, buddy." He glanced at Olivia. "This is Miss Grant. She works at the building where I clean." Olivia crouched to Ethan's level, her tone gentle. "Your dad helped us solve a very important problem yesterday." "He's very smart." Ethan's face lit with pride. "I know. Dad knows everything about computers. He used to build stuff for airplanes before Mom got sick." The innocent words hung between them, carrying a truth that needed no explanation. Later that evening at their small kitchen table, Daniel explained Olivia's offer again. Ethan leaned forward, eyes wide. "So you wouldn't have to clean offices anymore? You'd build machines again?" "Yes," Daniel admitted. "But it would also mean I might work longer some days. You might need after-school care sometimes." Ethan thought carefully, far more seriously than most boys his age. "Would you be happier, Dad, doing that kind of work again?" The question pierced Daniel's heart. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I would, but I'm happiest being your dad." Ethan grinned, simple and certain. "Then do both." And just like that, with the logic only a child could deliver, Daniel realized the path forward was clearer than he had dared hope. A week later, the executive boardroom at Helios Systems filled with the usual faces: engineers, project managers, department heads, each settling into their seats with the restless energy of people expecting another technical briefing. But Olivia Grant had something else in mind. She stood at the head of the table, calm but purposeful, waiting until the room quieted. "I want to begin today by telling you a story," she said, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent that drew every eye. "Last week, when our system failed, our brightest minds worked for hours without success, and then someone without a title, without a suit, solved the problem in minutes." She let the words hang for a moment before continuing. "He didn't come from MIT or Stanford. He didn't sit at this table. He was pushing a mop down the hallway." Murmurs rippled through the room, confusion and curiosity rising in equal measure. Olivia's gaze shifted toward the side of the room where Daniel sat quietly, wearing the same humility he had worn all his life. "This man," she said, gesturing toward him, "reminded me of something important. Brilliance isn't about degrees or titles. It's about attention to detail, the courage to speak when you can help, and the humility to serve before being asked. Daniel Ross is joining us as a senior systems engineer, and I expect every one of you to learn from him, not because of what's on his resume, but because of what he carries here." She tapped her chest lightly. "Character, perseverance, perspective." The room erupted into applause. It wasn't polite or restrained, it was genuine. Engineers leaned forward to shake his hand. Project managers nodded with respect. The same people who once walked past him without a second glance now regarded him as a peer, a colleague, a man they wanted to know. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his instinct pulling him away from the spotlight. He gave a small smile, nodding his thanks, but said little. Inside, his thoughts wandered not to pride, but to Ethan. He pictured his son's wide-eyed grin when he told him about the new job. That was the only applause he truly needed. Later that afternoon, Ethan visited the office for the first time. His small sneakers squeaked on the polished floors as he peered into rooms full of humming servers and glowing monitors. "Dad, is this where you saved the big computer?" he asked, eyes bright with wonder. Daniel chuckled, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "We saved it together, buddy. This is our new beginning." The engineers who passed smiled warmly, some bending down to greet Ethan, already adopting him as a kind of mascot. Pride swelled in Daniel's chest, not for the recognition he had received, but for the way his son saw him now. Not as a janitor, not as someone invisible, but as the man who had fought to give him both presence and purpose. Through it all, Daniel remained grounded. He still arrived early, still greeted the custodial staff by name, still carried himself with the same humility that had defined his years in the shadows. Titles could change, but his values did not. And while others saw a transformation from janitor to engineer, Daniel knew the truth. He had always been both, a man willing to work with his hands and a man able to solve the impossible. Now, finally, the world was beginning to see it too. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel Ross settled into his new role with a quiet confidence. What had once felt like an impossible leap from janitor to senior engineer soon became simply another day of doing what he loved. He poured himself into the work, sketching ideas late into the night, testing theories with the same relentless focus he once gave to fighter jets. And then, one afternoon in the boardroom, he unveiled something remarkable. It was a new thermal management system, a design that blended old aerospace techniques with fresh innovation. Clear, simple, and effective. It promised to cut operating costs by millions each year. As he explained the airflow models, the pressure thresholds, and the way his system could prevent failures before they ever started, the board listened in rapt attention. His words carried not just technical brilliance, but clarity, as though he wanted every person in the room, engineer or not, to understand. When he finished, silence fell for a heartbeat before the applause came. Olivia Grant sat at the head of the table, a rare smile softening her features. She realized, not for the first time, how close the company had come to missing all of this. But Daniel's impact stretched beyond the servers and the savings. It reached into the hallways, into the spaces most people ignored every day. He made it a point to greet the custodial staff, the security guards, the men and women who kept the building running quietly in the background. He sat with Maria, the janitor who had taken his old shift, sharing stories and reminding her that her work mattered. Soon others began to notice. Engineers who once walked past without a glance started stopping to chat, to say thank you. Slowly, the invisible staff became visible. The culture of Helios began to shift, not because of a memo or a policy, but because one man chose to treat everyone with dignity. Daniel never made speeches about it. He didn't need to. His actions spoke more clearly than words ever could. He had lived that life, after all, the quiet worker no one saw, and he refused to let anyone else feel that way again. Olivia watched these changes unfold with growing respect. She had built her career believing that talent was proven by credentials, that degrees and resumes told the story. But watching Daniel, she began to see how wrong that assumption could be. True brilliance wasn't always decorated with diplomas. Sometimes it walked into a boardroom in a janitor's uniform and saved a $100 million system. Sometimes it chose humility over recognition, service over ego. And as Helios thrived with Daniel's innovations, Olivia found herself reflecting not just on her company, but on her own definition of leadership. She realized that the strength of an organization wasn't measured only by the contracts it won, but by the way it treated the people who swept its floors and guarded its doors. In Daniel Ross, she saw more than an engineer. She saw the reminder that excellence wears many faces and that the greatest value often lies in the people the world overlooks. As the months unfolded, the rhythm of life at Helios shifted, not only for the company, but for Daniel himself. Long days at the office no longer felt like burdens. They felt like chapters in a story he had once thought was over. And in those chapters, Olivia Grant began to appear more often than he ever expected. At first, it was small things, her stopping by his desk to ask about a project, her lingering a little longer when Ethan bounded into the office after school. Then it was dinners shared after late meetings, laughter that slipped past professional walls, and conversations that reached far beyond cooling systems and contracts. Ethan took to her naturally. Children have a way of sensing authenticity, and Olivia's once ruthless edges softened in his presence. She listened to his questions with genuine interest, cheered at his science fair, and held his hand when they crossed busy streets. Slowly, she became part of his world, not as the CEO of Helios, but as someone he trusted, someone he began to call by a name reserved for those closest to him. Miss Olivia. For Daniel, the shift was harder to name. He had promised himself years ago that his heart would be reserved for his son, that love had taken enough from him already. But love has its own quiet persistence. He noticed it in the way Olivia looked at Ethan with tenderness, in the way she saw through Daniel's humility and treated him not as the man who mopped floors, nor the man who saved servers, but as the father who had built his life on sacrifice. And one evening in a quiet park in Seattle, beneath trees swaying in the soft glow of streetlights, he found the courage to name it. They sat on a bench, watching Ethan chase fireflies, his laughter carrying into the night. Daniel reached for Olivia's hand, his fingers trembling slightly, not from fear of rejection, but from the weight of the moment. "You know," he whispered, "I thought I had lost everything when I stepped away from engineering. But standing here now, I realize I didn't lose it all. I found something greater. I found you. I found us." Olivia's eyes glistened in the dim light. She didn't answer with words at first. She simply tightened her hand around his, the kind of quiet reply that spoke louder than any promise. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt not just like a man reclaiming a career, but like a man finding home again. A year later, that sense of home had taken root in something real, in a modest house just outside the city. Laughter spilled from the dining room where 3 chairs surrounded a simple wooden table. Olivia sat down the plates, Daniel poured the juice, and Ethan, grinning ear to ear, told stories about school with the unstoppable energy only a child could bring. The walls of that little house were not adorned with wealth or luxury, but they were filled with something far rarer: belonging. Together they had built a family from the ashes of loss, from the courage to trust again, from the love that had slowly, steadily taken hold. And as they sat down to eat, hands brushing in the candlelight, Daniel knew the truth. He hadn't just found his way back to engineering. He had found his way back to life. They were no longer just a CEO, an engineer, and a boy. They were Olivia, Daniel, and Ethan. A family born not of perfection but of choice, built not on titles, but on trust, and held together by something stronger than any system Daniel had ever designed: love. The story of Daniel Ross, Ethan, and Olivia Grant offers a profound lesson about the hidden strength in humility and the courage to prioritize love over ambition. Daniel, a former aerospace engineer turned janitor, sacrifices a brilliant career to be present for his son, Ethan, after profound loss, showing that true success is measured not by titles, but by the lives we touch. His quiet act of stepping into a crisis to save $100 million system reveals that expertise and character can shine in the most unassuming places, challenging us to look beyond appearances and value the unseen. Olivia's transformation, from a CEO defined by control to someone who embraces connection with Daniel and Ethan, teaches us that vulnerability can reshape our perspective, making room for family and purpose over prestige. Ethan's innocent faith ties their story together, reminding us that a child's trust can inspire courage in us all. This tale urges us to honor the quiet heroes around us, to choose presence over pride, and to recognize that life's greatest rewards often come from unexpected moments of connection. What moment in Daniel's journey moved you most? Have you ever found strength in someone the world overlooked? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's celebrate the power of resilience and love. If this story stirred your heart, hit that subscribe button for more tales of hope, courage, and second chances that remind us we're never truly invisible. Join our community, and let's keep these stories alive together.